And we have a very special presenter here, Ms. Ann Wagner, and she is from the Curator of Drawings from the Arkansas Museum of Fine Arts. And we actually have a new exhibit that's out right now. It's one called Small Works on Paper, where it's different artists that's throughout the Arkansas who have done small works of art, but done an amazing job. We have a lot of great artists from Arkansas, and Ms. Wagner's going to talk about one in particular who is actually from the Delta, Alonzo Ford. Has a great history and has a great story behind him, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about what she has to say about him and showing some of the great drawings that he's done. So from here on out, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Ms. Wagner and about where she's come from. Ms. Wagner has been part of the Curator of Drawings, Arkansas Museum of Fine Arts, since 2012. She's been a curatorial assistant and later an assistant curator of prints and drawings at the National Portrait Gallery before leaving her PhD at the University of Maryland. She has published books on American modern artists such as John Marin and Herman Merrill, as well as public works of art projects. The first one of the New Deal projects of the 1930s. I mentioned hearing more about that too later on. Wagner is currently busy preparing future exhibitions for the Arkansas Museum of Fine Arts, which will reopen to the public with a major renovation in 2022. So I'm looking forward to going back there and seeing some of the things that she's done. So with that on out, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Wagner. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much. It's a real privilege. Thank you for the lovely introduction, and and thank you for setting up what I appreciate has got to be a difficult thing to be able to get everything streaming from two places out to everybody else who's out there. And I think we have quite a few folks from around the country who've been interested and responding. So let me share my screen so you can see what is going on. There we go. Come on. There. And I'm starting with a picture of Alonzo Ford himself, and he is standing in front of one of his drawings that was featured in an exhibition that I curated in 2015 at what was then the Arkansas Art Center. And it was called A Little Poetry, The Art of Alonzo Ford. That comes from something that he told me about his own art, which I thought was really charming. I feel he's a very important person in the cultural heritage of Arkansas, whose story speaks to us, and I hope will always speak to us through his drawings, although he passed away in 2019. His drawings show us the artist's life and the lives of his family and his community, and that community was the African-American community that farmed the Mississippi Delta in Phillips County near the small city of Helena, West Helena, for those of you who are from outside Arkansas, and the towns of Southland, Lakeview, and Lexa. And so for my pals outside Arkansas, that's right on the Mississippi, magnificent Delta land that I just loved going over and seeing Alonzo Ford at his home place. I met him at the openings of various exhibits at the Arts Center because that's a long drive from out in Phillips County to Little Rock, but he would make that for any major show or anything that particularly interested him. He would come out even though it would mean a long drive home in the dark. So he was somebody who really cared. And so we would often talk. And I, of course, was new to Arkansas in 2012 when I met him. I'm from Maryland. So I had a lot to learn about Arkansas art and culture, and I still do. Alonzo Ford was certainly one of the people who helped teach me. I saw him at the Art Center, but I also visited him at his home, and that's where I took this picture that shows their old barn and some of the farm equipment that I gather is still there. It was when I was there. So I took that picture and others that you'll see when I was visiting him in 2014 and 2015. I didn't have the chance to get to know Ford nearly as well as I would have liked. He and I were different in many ways. He was born in rural Arkansas in 1941 and spent his life working hard on the land and in factories around the country. I was born 20 years later, spent my time working in museums. As a Black man with his roots in the Delta, I'm a suburban white woman, but we had some important things in common. We're both artists, and we both cared deeply about his artwork and community and art in the state of Arkansas. And I certainly can't pretend to be a real authority on Alonzo Ford. There's a great deal I don't know yet and may never really understand the way I'd like to about his life and his art in his home area, because of course it's a very rich cultural area. There's a lot to know. The African American community depicted in his art has a cultural history that I can appreciate only from the outside, but I do appreciate it. I think he did a wonderful job depicting it. And I also hoped that this event will have attracted some friends, neighbors, advocates, collectors, people who can share stories, and people will have questions. So I'm certainly eager to learn more, and I will leave time at the end of the presentation for any kind of questions and any kind of stories and remarks that people would like to do. And I will ask you to forgive the poor quality of some of the images of Ford's work. I got the best pictures I could, but sometimes they're not what I would have liked. That's particularly because of my own poor photography. And here is Alonzo Ford's home. His parents, Henry and Cornelia Ford, both moved to Lone Oak, Arkansas from Alabama sometime before the 1910 census. And they married in Lone Oak in 1923 and arrived in Phillips County, the county where Alonzo Ford would wind up living, by 1940. That's the year before he was born. The Fords came to the area in response to the creation of a new farming community called Lakeview that the Franklin Roosevelt administration, Farm Security Administration, established Lakeview in 1937 as a specifically African-American agricultural community. At first, Henry Ford was sharecropping and doing carpentry and bricklaying, other jobs in the area. And it was while that was still going on, I think, that Alonzo Ford was born. He was the second to youngest of 13 children. So by 1944, though, the Fords had purchased the land that you see here near the small community of Southland. Soon they'd established a farm, and they grew cotton, hay, a wide variety of vegetables and fruits and nuts, and raised cows, hogs, chickens, and ducks, and kids. Alonzo Ford's father, Henry Ford, advanced from being a laborer and sharecropper, the son of enslaved people in Alabama, to being a farmer who owned his own land and was able to get his children to school. Alonzo Ford said, "I was very proud of my dad. He was a hardworking man who laid brick, did carpentry work, and all that, and kept the farm going at the same time. Down with him and helped him do carpentry work." So certainly was an important experience for Alonzo Ford. And here's Henry Ford himself, and then he was married to Cornelia Matthews Ford, whom you can see in the drawing at the far left. And she kept a large garden, grew a lot of vegetables that she canned. In fact, the Federal Housing Administration was so impressed by her work canning that they sent people to study how she did it because she was so good and efficient at it. They wanted other people to learn from her. And she, of course, was also caring for her 13 children in a house that was built with the help of the Federal Housing Administration in about 1950. And that is the house that this room is in. And Alonzo Ford made this drawing of her and kept it hanging in the gallery that he installed in the front room when he was living there alone in his last decades. The Ford children grew up a few miles from Helena, Arkansas, which is now Helena, West Helena. But of course, this was the era of segregation. So I don't know. In this picture, you can see a theater. I don't know if they would have been allowed to attend a movie or whether there was a segregated section. But there would certainly have been places in Helena and a town like Lexa, where Alonzo Ford and his family wouldn't have been as welcome as they were in the very African American community of Lakeview. I wish I'd asked Ford more about life under segregation. It was certainly a dominating force in his life, and there would be a lot more to know. Henry Ford was literate, which is not to be taken for granted for somebody who was the son of enslaved people. And of course, in slavery times, it was illegal to teach any slaves to read and write. That it would have considered that very, very dangerous. And I've read about the penalties, which were pretty brutal. So it was very, very rare. So he would have been probably the first generation of his family to be literate. But they did get all their children educated. And when I've read census records, you can see which children are in school. And as they became old enough, they all went to probably a local school like this. This was what Alonzo told me, that would have been a church on Sunday and a school during the week. So out there in the rural land where they lived, rather than in one of the bigger towns. And then when Ford wasn't in school, he helped out on the farm. As you can see in this drawing, so there's always a lot of work to do. Perhaps he might be the boy who is carrying something toward the house in about the middle of the picture there. That might be Alonzo. And you can also see people who are working at a saw. And let's see. You'll notice that there's a horse grazing there. Ford said his father didn't approve of spending money on gasoline for a tractor when you could feed draft animals on just grass and grain. So everything was always horse and mule driven as long as Henry Ford was alive. The old machinery that they would have used, the old horse-drawn machinery, in fact, a lot of it is or was still out there. You can see a hay rake here that is becoming rapidly overgrown. And I wonder how many hours Alonzo Ford and his brothers, maybe his father, spent sitting in that seat going back and forth over the fields. I imagine there wasn't a whole lot of time for the children away from schoolwork and farm work, but of course children do find play. And Ford made some drawings like this of children playing, and this one's a little closer up view of the kids than you often see in a lot of his farm drawings. So I wonder maybe whether one of these boys might be him, and perhaps they've been out there playing with the dogs and now they're playing marbles. So he would depict some of his own experiences. But while he was still very young, as a teenager, he left home. And a lot of his siblings had done the same. He said, I didn't know my older brothers until I was a teenager and they came home to visit. He told me that he worked in factories in Detroit, Chicago, Milwaukee, and California, starting as a teenager. Said he found the work easy and it got boring quickly. So he would quit jobs fairly soon and move on to something new. And this is just a picture of a factory worker that I found. I don't know where Alonzo Ford worked, and this certainly isn't him. If anybody knows of any images that he ever did of any factory or city scenes, I certainly don't know of them, and would be really interested to know. But then Henry Ford died in 1963. I know you will have seen, if you're interested in him and know something about him, you'll have seen the date 1961, but I've seen the Social Security Death Index, and it says 1963. So that was when he died. So Alonzo Ford returned home to help his mother run the farm, and she lived until the age of 95, which was in 1995. So he and she lived together on the farm for many years. And here he is many years later standing by that barn that he must have known so well. Sometimes he would be working on the farm, sometimes he'd work in the area, sometimes he would go out of town to earn some more money, kind of alternating back and forth. But by 1971, he had moved home permanently. And he says, sometimes I had as many as 3 jobs at one time. I worked at the compress in Helena. at a lumber mill in West Helena, and then started cutting timber. So he was a busy, hardworking guy. But all of this hard work, it started to get to him. He started to have health problems, and he was looking for less exhausting ways to make money. So he started to cut, dye, and finish the knees of cypress trees. For those of you who don't know about cypress trees, they live in the water, and one of the ways that they can breathe is to have these protuberances that come up from their roots and get up into the air. So he would cut some of these off and sell them in places that sold to the tourists. He says, I got sick and would faint if I didn't lay down. I thought it looked like I wasn't going to get well, so I started on my roots. And people saw an abstract beauty in these works. They were shown at the West Helena Public Library in the 1980s, and people began to find a connection to these works. And they helped to get Ford to think about artistic expression, and that might be something that he could do. As he was also starting to think about his heritage and that of his family and his neighbors in the Delta. He'd not married as most of his brothers and sisters did, so far as I know. I don't know all the details of everybody. So he had no children to carry on his legacy. He said, I was mostly sick. I'd been doing some of everything, this and that, and there wasn't going to be no record of what I'd been doing in my life. So I thought, I've got to come up with something to leave a record, a history of what I've been doing. And what he came up with was art. He started to take classes at Phillips County Community College in Helena, West Helena, which is now called Phillips Community College of the University of Arkansas. Ford rode his bicycle from home to college and back, which was a round trip of 25 miles. So it's something that meant a lot to him. He started with classes in pottery, but then he got interested in drawing and painting. And in 1981, 1982, he filled a sketchbook with drawings. And for those of you who are not former art students like me, that's a very standard kind of assignment for people learning to draw. It helps you to not just draw when you're in class, but to draw all day long and to look at a lot of things and learn a lot. And when you look at his sketchbook, you can see there's this great variety, lots of work. He was good right off the bat. And this is the first page of that sketchbook. And you look at it, it's this drawing with these confident strokes, strong composition, bright, rich colors. And no, it's an abstraction. It's the last thing you would expect. Or no, depending upon who you are, maybe if you knew him, it wouldn't be. But it helps to appreciate the range of his work. He also would draw portraits of family and friends, and I don't know how many of these might be from photographs or from life. And you'll see he liked to fill the background with various shapes instead of just leaving it as blank and neutral. And so I'd be interested in to know who some of these are. I've got pictures of all the pages. Not going to show you everything because we'd be here all night, but because I don't think he usually labeled things, so I don't necessarily know who they are. And here's another lovely one that's a little later, taking that portrait tradition along, but the tree is from the sketchbook. And yes, he started to draw local landscapes. And he'd say he was good and really cared and worked hard at his work. He said, I don't believe in letting nothing go until it's done right, the way I want it to be. So after he completed school and began working professionally, sometimes he would work on a drawing for months. He would make sure every detail was what he wanted. In the sketchbook, and you can see Alonzo's hand actually holding the sketchbook open for me while I'm taking pictures. He made this beautiful drawing. That's probably his own home on the left. It certainly looks like it, or it's something very similar. And this snow scene of Helena Bridge on the right that I just love. He said in college classes, he learned about shading, and clearly must have studied perspective, probably both linear and atmospheric perspective, to create depth on the page. But he's also got his very own personal sense of design. It's not just what others were teaching him, it's what he already knew he wanted to do or discovered as he went along. And he loved to play bare trees and their delicate branches against the snow and against the sky. In fact, I think you may see more snow scenes than there were actual snowy days in Phillips County. Ford did not take classes for very long, just a few months, because he knew what he wanted to learn. And once he'd gotten that, then he was ready to go along with his mature art. And eventually, the house that he lived in, he made the front room into a gallery. I think that's probably very, very late, but it was in place by the time I was there. And he also eventually built a studio, which is back here in the back right, back where a chicken coop used to be. And I've got the honor of going back and seeing what he was working on back there. He got going as a professional artist and was encouraged by various local people, including the historian Dale Pillow Kirkman. And he had exhibitions at the Phillips County Museum, the Fine Arts Center in Hot Springs, Collector's Art Gallery in Washington, D.C., the Arts and Science Center for Southeast Arkansas and Pine Bluff, Arkansas, as well as at the Arkansas Arts Center, as I already mentioned. In about 2000, he approached Garbo Hearn of Hearn Fine Art in Little Rock about his art. And that is a wonderful gallery specializing in African American art that you can see here. And so they represented him for the rest of his career. So that's, it was very, very important to him, of course. So let's have a little look at his the poetry of his art. He certainly didn't stop making abstractions. It's not what he's best known for, but when he left school, he continued. This is from 1984, a couple of years after he'd finished his school, with these strong lines and strong colors and shapes. They're really neat and interesting, and I think he was very proud of them and enjoyed doing them. And here are a couple more of the abstractions from 1996 and 2003. The one on the left is oil pastel. The one on the right is red and blue ballpoint pen, which I would guess that in addition to black, red and blue must have been the colors that were easiest to get, because that's what you'll often see him working with. And you can just see how much fun he's having with creating all of these shapes, and he did actually quite a few of those. And so he's best known for his work in black and white, but it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody who knew Alonzo Ford that he had a great sense of color, because he was a wonderful gardener. He, when he had home and was going along with taking care of the property there, he planted these big, elaborate, gorgeous flower beds. And you can see here he is showing me around, and I was there in the spring, which was just perfect to be able to see all these different flowers. And in fact, he had a calendar made with photographs of his flowers, so he was very proud of them. And he did also some paintings of people in flower beds. So it's something that he was very interested in and took pride in, but it was not a really major thing as far as I know ever in his art. Those are small numbers compared to the other pieces. And here's something else he did that I was interested to figure out a little more of the history, because this is Old Town Lake, and that's the lake that Lakeview, that was founded in 1937, was named after. So this is a place that would have been very central in the African American community there. So probably a place he knew well. And I don't know whether the cypress knees he sculpted came from there or not, but they may very well have. As eager as Ford was to record his own history and that of his family, it's not surprising he made a lot of drawings of work on family farm and other farms. This drawing of people picking cotton took him nearly a year to complete. Every one of those cotton plants, every one of those leaves is drawn, and it's just the way he wanted it. But no, it was not something that everybody in the family agreed on. He said he had a young relative who said she didn't want to see no farm scenes. She didn't want to see nobody picking cotton. He said young people from the country try to distance themselves from that. They don't think about history. They just think of a lot of hard work. No, I could see both sides of that. People who are struggling to get away from that difficult history, yeah, it could be something they would want to see. And in fact, he concentrated entirely on the African American community. If anybody has seen any drawings he did of any white people, I haven't seen it. No, he was passionate about all of these people that he knew and lived with, and his own family and all the people he knew, to show us that community, not the communities that he'd seen in so much other art, but his very own community. And the title, by the way, I don't know where that came from. I read it in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, and I don't know whether that's something he put on it with titles. I think sometimes he titled things and sometimes he didn't. When I was doing my show of his work, I sent him a list with pictures and said, tell me what the titles really are, because in some cases I don't know. And so I know what some of those titles are, and I've tried to check everything in the show, but this is one where I haven't seen the work, and I don't know whether that's written on it or anything like that. So, you know, take some of them with a little bit of a grain of salt. When I was last out at Ford's place in 2015, he still had the old farm machinery and kitchen gear there among the buildings. And I imagine it was very helpful when he was making drawings to be able to have the details of the machinery and the equipment in front of him. You will see that some of these things will show up often. Something like this, now there's the wagon in the foreground, and I don't know whether he's still got the crosscut saw, but no, it's all the kind of thing that he would have known so well. And the houses and the people and the tools and the fields in the South End area. And in this case, this is a drawing butchering hogs, which would have been demanding, difficult work. Kind of glad he did it in black and white, because I imagine that in color it would probably be kind of appalling. And you can see that there is a big cast iron kettle there boiling, I suppose, rendering fat or something like that. And that same kettle is still on the farm. I saw it, took a picture of it there. So sitting upside down now. But you know, sometimes the very things that he knew as a child, he would have continued to live with for years. So they can just go right on into his art. And for instance, here are a couple of people plowing, and there are two different kinds of plows. And he probably knew all of that kind of detail very well. He probably spent a lot of time doing this. And all of the machinery you see in his drawings, it's all horse and mule drawn. There are no tractors, there are no trucks, anything like that. If anybody knows differently, I'd love to know about it. But I think he's really thinking of a particular time during his father's life. After his father died, Alonzo was able to buy a tractor. But while his father was alive, it was all horses and mules. So he's probably mostly documenting the time between when they bought the farm in 1943 and when Alonzo left home. And Alonzo would have been about 2 at that point. And when Alonzo left home in the 50s. So it's not really that long, and yet there is a timeless feel as if all of this could have been going on for many, many decades. And here's another one of the scenes of farming, and again, that's probably that same kettle in the background and some of the same buildings that he knew so well. I'm sorry about the bad picture. And here's a little boy playing with the dog in the yard while probably his father or older brother is slopping the hogs. So it's nice to see, now and then you'll get some play. It's not all work. And Ford did like dogs, and he had some when I was out to visit him. And he also did like to make some color drawings, like this one that would have been of something that would be a church on Sundays and probably school the rest of the week. So you can see the colorful stained glass and that brilliant red door. And then here is a larger schoolhouse, multiple chimneys and lots of children out playing in the yard at recess. So you just hear their voices. So I would love to know what particular schoolhouse that is, if it is a particular one, if anybody knows that one. But those are also kind of things that he portrayed multiple times, different kinds of scenes. This is something that he would have remembered from childhood. He said a lot of those were gone by the time I was there, a lot of those buildings, but he remembered them. In addition to his studies at community college, one of the places that Alonzo Ford learned about art was at the Arkansas Art Center. And he would come to a lot of events, a lot of shows, and he became a member of the Art Center in the 80s and came out. And in the 90s, he took some of his work to the director, Townsend Wolfe, you see here, so that Townsend Wolfe could have a look at it and talk to him. And Wolfe expressed interest and encouraged Ford to keep working. The artist said, he gave me the highest compliment and he told me to get some better paper, which is a good compliment. No, we want your work to last. And he did. He worked the things that I saw, he was using very good materials. Among the exhibitions that he certainly must have seen at the Arkansas Art Center was the 1982 exhibition of drawings by Bill Traylor, who was a man who had been born enslaved in Alabama. And only in his very late years, in the 1930s and 40s, did he start drawing. And he did these amazing profile images. Many of them are very disquieting and violent and difficult. Other ones show people dressed in finery. You know, there's some very nice ones and some very troubling ones. They're very powerful. And I think the idea of the profiles kind of, and the way that pattern worked on a lighter ground, I think kind of must have interested Alonzo Ford. But he did such different works himself. He put things in full space with details and land and sky and buildings around, and had so much more sophisticated understanding. So, and just the atmosphere, the whole emotional way the drawings come across is incredibly different. So while I think he may have gotten some ideas from Bill Traylor, he's a totally original artist. And I'm not saying he copied him at all. He just took it off in his own directions. And one of the things that Ford started doing, I think probably a little bit later than some of the earlier farm drawings, is doing more up-close drawings of figures, mostly in profile, not always perfectly in profile. And they let you see people not just doing the farm work, but doing more individual things on their own sometimes, or in groups. Like these kids are coming back from fishing, they've got some fish, maybe take them back to their mom to cook for dinner. And Ford said he played a little semi-pro ball at one time, so he knew what he was doing when he was drawing this, making this wonderful drawing fastball. I don't know where that one is. I think it's marvelous. I'm a baseball fan, so I enjoy that. And of course, the Negro Leagues were very much in force when he was a young man, so he may have been a fan. And another aspect of Delta life is tremendously important, was also important to Alonzo Ford. Helena, of course, is called the blues capital of the Delta, and it's the home of the famous annual King Biscuit Blues Festival. Lots of music venues. So I get the impression that Alonzo Ford must have spent some time there. I did not ask him about it, but I should have. Just shows you've got to talk to people when you have the chance, because he did a lot of drawings of people playing, particularly playing guitars, but you'll see that often their gestures are different. One man's using his something to rest his foot on, the other guy isn't. They're dressed in different ways. He's studying the details of what's going on with these guys. And then he will also draw people dancing to the music. So remembering he was growing up during the 1950s, there's probably some rock and roll going on there as well as the blues. And here are young people off walking together, doing a little courting. So he will relax the some of his profile rule a little bit to get some of these wonderful poses going. And he also liked to show children having a little fun. So like we at the Arkansas Museum of Fine Arts have My Cat Skip on the left. So this little girl playing, or pretty good sized girl actually, she could be a teenager, playing with her cat. And this boy is carving a walking stick, working at a place where craft is so important. Mention that the carving of walking sticks is a very important cultural thing that's gone on for a long time, is something with a major history, and I wonder whether Alonzo Ford ever did any of that. If he did, I'm unaware of it. One of the interesting things to me is that you rarely see women in the farm scenes. I guess mostly they're working inside. Now and then one will show up. But in these more up close scenes, you see a lot of women and girls. You know, the people he would have seen inside the houses, not instead of outside. So there are particularly a lot of brushing and braiding hair, these kind of quiet, intimate moments between maybe a mother or an older sister and a little girl. And it's really get a more intimate connection with the community through these. And then later on in the 2000s, he started to add more color and was using ballpoint pen with some of these figure designs, and they're just really they're a lot of fun. And even pretty late in his career, he was coming up with very new subjects like this one with the twirlers with the marching band. That may be something that he had seen at a local football game or something of that kind, and just as a lot of fun with the bright colors and people having a good time. Not too many years after this, actually, Alonzo Ford had to have eye surgery, but he recovered from that and was able to keep drawing for several years. And he continued to innovate. Garbo Hearn told me that he did more than one of these wood sculptures. This was a big tree trunk in the front yard that he made into this striking abstract sculpture, and he started painting it, but it had been out there for a while, and at one point it cracked. So, of course, Mr. Ford just made a nice brace for it to keep it together, added some more color and some more form, and went on with it. And last I saw it was in front of his house. I'm not sure where it is now. He spent his last days in a hospital in South Haven, Mississippi, with family around him, and passed away on July 13th, 2019, at the age of 78. Nearly 40 years before, Alonzo Ford had worried what sort of legacy he might leave behind, and worked hard to make sure that people and the way of life he knew in the African-American Delta community he loved were recorded, but also how he felt about them was recorded. They're not just factual, they're much more than that. They communicate to, I'm sure, a great deal to the people that he knew and loved and who were part of that community and knew that lifestyle, but also to those of us who come from outside and wouldn't know about it if we didn't have his work to communicate what that life was like and so how he felt about it. So it can speak to all the world. That's the great thing about art. So Alonzo Ford left a very rich legacy of memory and history and art. And put up a last picture of some of his flowers in tribute. So that is a good deal of what I know about Alonzo Ford, but I would love to hear, just see in your comments what you know, what story you have, so that I can learn about them. And I imagine the people at the Delta Cultural Center would be interested to know too. So, feel free to contact me at the Arkansas Art Center if you know things about Alonzo Ford but I'd love to see questions tonight. Questions, comments, stories.
All right. I think,
this
was there any questions on there, Hal, that you saw? Or?
Yeah, there were.
Yeah, I can see.
I think one person asked, have you seen his painted gourds? I thought that was kind of an interesting question. I didn't see that in there. Have you seen any of his painted gourds in your collection before, or anybody's ever done that?
No, I haven't. Oh, that's so good to know about. I'll be
taking
notes.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And I think our former curator, he's also mentioning that he knows that where that one picture was, where Cotton was king. So maybe, Bill, if you have that, we might be able to let Dr. Wagner
I know it used to be on your wall, but that was 6 years ago. Yeah, I'd love to know where it is.
Let's see. I think that, do we see any other questions?
I've seen his self-portrait, but I didn't have a good picture of it. The one I had some light glancing off the glass so that you couldn't really see it very well. So if anyone has a good reproduction of self-portrait, and I don't know if there are more, but this one is particular.
Yeah, his niece, Stephanie Johnson, I think she had a self-portrait, that she's going to,
I'd love to know the people in the drawings. That would be wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much.
And I think
so great.
That was about it.
Really
if anybody has any other questions?
Okay.
Comment.
God bless you, Garbo and Dr. Hearn, for taking such of Alonzo. A wonderful guy. And I just said I don't want his art forgotten, and I'm just so glad the Delta Cultural Center continues to be interested, and I certainly do. We have the one piece at Museum of Fine Arts, but I know there's a lot more out there.
All right, I'm not seeing any more questions, but that was an amazing presentation, and he was just an amazing guy. And if anybody wants to let others know about this, about other information about Alonzo Ford, let them see this presentation is actually on our Facebook page at deltaculturalcenter.com. Look for that. Look for our Facebook page, and we do have information about this, and kind of show it and share it with other people. But Dr. Wagner, thank you again. Thank you so much for coming, and we just appreciate you coming to presenting for us today and telling us about this amazing person. He's such a talented individual, so thank you so much.
Oh yeah. And of course he's one of these people that he was busy before, so it took a little while to find out what all could be there. So anybody who thinks you might like to be an artist and you haven't tried it yet, go ahead and try it. Because you didn't do it before, it doesn't mean you can't do it.
And if anybody has any other questions that they'd like to ask, you can just email me at richard.spillman@arkansas.gov, and I'll get it to Dr. Wagner. I'll find out here, and we'll definitely be able to try to answer questions as best we can.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for coming, or thank you for presenting to us today. It was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a great honor, and I hope one of these days to be able to come out and do something in person after I've been vaccinated. We're all feeling a little safer. I'm just
absolutely.
In person, meet you.
All right, thank you so much, and check out other programs and events that we have at our Facebook page or at our website. And thank you all so much for coming.
Great, thank you. Take care. Good night.
Thank you. You too.